Lovely to see you again.
Back again.
Oh, it's a great pleasure.
Yeah. Anyway, no.
A single photograph. That is all it took. One decision made behind closed palace doors. There was no press release or phone call. No courtesy warning to the man most affected by it. Just a quiet, deliberate act. And suddenly, everything Harry thought he understood about where he stood with his father was thrown into question all over again. Those close to him say he did not see it coming. That is the part that stings the most. Because this is not just a story about a photograph. This is a story about power, about a king who is rewriting history one image at a time, and a son who is watching it happen from 3,000 miles away. The decision that started everything. What actually happened? Because the headlines move fast on this one. And when headlines move fast, details get buried. So, before anything else, let us slow down and look at exactly what King Charles did, and why the people who know this family best say it hit Harry the way it did. For years, royal wedding photographs have been more than just memories. Inside the British monarchy, they are documents, they are statements. They tell the world who belongs, who matters, and who the institution is proud to call its own. Every carefully posed image released by Buckingham Palace carries a message. Most people just do not know how to read them. Charles knows exactly how to read them, and more importantly, he knows how to use them. The decision that sent shockwaves through Harry's world involved the official wedding photographs from a major royal celebration, the kind of images that get framed, archived, and circulated for decades, the kind that ends up in coffee table books and history documentaries, permanent, unambiguous, the kind of image that tells the world that this person was here. This person was part of this, except Harry was not included, not in the way he expected, or in the way that would have signaled any softening between him and the institution he walked away from. The photographs were curated, selected, and in that selection, a very specific message was sent. Harry's absence was not accidental. Sources familiar with the situation have been clear about that. This was not an oversight buried in the chaos of event logistics. Royal photo selections at this level go through layers of review. Courtiers, communications teams, senior aides who have spent careers understanding exactly what each image projects to the public. Nothing gets released by accident. Every face in every frame is a choice, and the choice was made. Now, here is where it gets complicated, because on the surface some people looked at this and said, well, Harry stepped back. Harry left. He chose a life outside the working royal family. Why would he expect to feature prominently in official imagery tied to an institution he publicly walked away from and then spent 2 years criticizing in a memoir and a Netflix documentary? That is a fair question, but it misses something important. It misses the fact that Harry is still a prince. He is still the son of the king. And by blood, birth, and every legal definition that exists within the British royal framework, a member of this family. Stepping back from royal duties does not erase that. It never has. And for most of the time since the Sussexes relocated to California, there had been at least a surface-level understanding. It was fragile, imperfect, but real that the door had not been fully shut. This decision suggests the door has moved. People who have watched the royal family closely for decades will tell you that the monarchy communicates in symbols more than in words. Official statements are rare and carefully worded when they do come. But images do the heavy lifting. Images say the things that no press secretary will ever put in writing. And the image that was released, or more precisely, the image that was not released, spoke volumes. Harry received the news the way he receives most palace decisions these days. Not through a phone call from his father, not through a private message from a senior aide. Through the same channels that the rest of the world uses, which is itself a statement. When a son finds out about a decision this significant the same way a journalist does, something has broken down so completely that it almost defies description. Those around Harry say the reaction was immediate, not explosive. Not the kind of reaction that gets leaked to the press through a Sussex spokesperson. Something quieter than that. Something that people who know Harry well describe as a particular kind of stillness that comes over him when something lands in a way he was not prepared for. He had been trying. Had. That is the part of this story that often gets lost in the noise. Behind the scenes, away from the cameras and the podcast appearances and the public narratives, Harry had been making efforts, small ones, cautious ones, the kind of efforts that a man makes when he is not sure if the other person is willing to meet him halfway but is trying anyway. Visits to his father during Charles's cancer treatment, calls that were shorter than either of them probably wanted, gestures that never quite landed the way they were intended. And then this, a photograph that said, more clearly than any statement ever could, the recalibration of this family's public image does not include you. Now ask yourself this. What does Charles know that Harry does not? Because there is something underneath this decision that goes deeper than one set of photographs. Something that the palace has not said publicly and may never say publicly. And to understand what that is, you have to understand how the royal family has used images before to signal exactly this kind of shift. That is where this story gets even darker. And that is exactly where we are going next. A history written in pictures. Here is something most people do not think about. The British monarchy has survived for centuries. Wars, scandals, abdications, public humiliations that would have destroyed lesser institutions. And through all of it, one tool has remained more powerful than any speech, any statement, any carefully worded press release: the photograph, or more precisely, the decision of who appears in it. This is not new. This is not something that started with Harry and Meghan. This is a tradition that runs so deep inside the palace walls that most senior royals understand it before they ever sit for their first official portrait. You want to know where you stand with the institution? Do not listen to what they say. Look at the pictures. And right now, the pictures are telling a very specific story. Let us go back. Because context matters here. When King Edward VIII abdicated in 1936, the erasure was swift and total. One moment he was at the center of every official image. The next, he was gone, not just from public life. From the visual record that the palace chose to project going forward, the institution moved on. The photographs moved on with it. Edward spent the rest of his life in exile, watching a family that had simply rearranged itself around his absence. History does not repeat itself exactly, but inside the monarchy, it rhymes constantly. Fast forward to Prince Andrew. Here is a man who was once one of the most prominent figures in royal family photographs. A war hero, a senior working royal, someone whose face appeared alongside the Queen at the most significant public moments of the past 4 decades. And then came the Jeffrey Epstein scandal, the catastrophic BBC interview, the unraveling that nobody inside the palace could contain. Within months, Andrew was gone from official imagery, quietly removed from the visual narrative of the working royal family. He still existed and attended private family events. But the public face of the monarchy was restructured around his absence so efficiently that it almost looked effortless. It was not effortless or deliberate. It was a masterclass in how the palace uses images to redraw its own boundaries without ever having to announce that it is doing so. Harry watched all of that happen in real time, which makes the current situation even more striking, because Harry, of all people, understands what it means when the palace starts editing photographs. He has seen it done before. He knows it is never accidental. He knows there is always a decision maker behind the curtain, always a rationale that goes far deeper than aesthetics or logistics. And yet here he is. On the receiving end of the same tool, he watched dismantle his uncle's public standing. Now, here is where this gets even more interesting. Because the visual shift away from Harry did not begin with this wedding photograph decision. It began much earlier. Long before Megxit was announced, before the Oprah interview, long before the memoir. Those who have studied the palace's communication strategy closely will point to something that most casual observers completely missed at the time. In the years leading up to Harry and Meghan's departure, there was a subtle but consistent repositioning happening in official royal imagery. The photographs released for major occasions began to center more heavily around William and Catherine, around the direct line of succession, around the image of a modern, stable monarchy built on a very particular foundation. Harry and Meghan were still present, but they were drifting toward the edges of the frame, slowly, carefully, in a way that only became obvious in hindsight. That is how the palace works. It does not make dramatic announcements. It does not hold press conferences to explain its internal decisions. It shifts, adjusts, and reframes, And by the time most people notice what has changed, the change is already complete. So when Harry looks at the wedding photographs released in recent weeks and sees what is missing, he is not just reacting to a single moment. He is recognizing a pattern he has been watching develop for years. A pattern that now appears to have reached its logical conclusion. Which brings us back to the question, what does Charles know that Harry does not? Here is one answer. Charles knows that the monarchy's long-term stability depends on clarity, on a clean, coherent public narrative about who the working royal family is and what it represents. Ambiguity is expensive. Keeping a door half open to a son who has consistently used his platform to criticize the institution creates a message problem that no communications team can fully resolve. So the door gets closed, not with a statement or with a confrontation, with a photograph or the absence of one. Has Charles been planning this longer than anyone realized? Is this the final move in a sequence that began years ago? Or is there something else driving this decision? Something more personal? Something that has less to do with institutional strategy and everything to do with a father who has simply run out of road? Because those are two very different stories. And the truth, as it almost always is with this family, is probably somewhere in between. Harry's world. When the news hit, let us talk about where Harry actually is right now. Not the version of Harry that appears in carefully managed public appearances. Not the Harry from the Netflix documentary or the memoir press tour, the actual Harry. The one living inside a life that looks glamorous from the outside, but has been quietly unraveling at the edges for longer than most people realize. The money. Because money matters, and nobody in the Sussex camp wants to talk about it directly. When Harry and Meghan left the royal family and relocated to Montecito, California, the financial proposition seemed solid. The Netflix deal, Spotify deal, and the memoir. The speaking engagements. On paper, it looked like a couple who had successfully monetized their royal connections and built something independent and sustainable. The reality has been messier. The Spotify deal collapsed. $100 million worth of audio ambition ended with a single podcast series that the platform quietly walked away from. The Netflix relationship has cooled considerably since the early days of breathless announcements and blockbuster promises. The documentary was performed, the memoir sold, but the ongoing content pipeline that was supposed to sustain the Sussex brand long-term has struggled to find its footing. Harry's legal battles in the UK have produced some victories. The phone hacking cases against British tabloids resulted in settlements and public vindication on certain fronts. But those victories came with costs that rarely make the headlines. Legal fees, emotional bandwidth, time spent fighting wars on multiple fronts simultaneously. And, perhaps most significantly, every courtroom appearance, deposition, and public legal battle kept reopening wounds that Harry was simultaneously trying to heal in other areas of his life. It is a contradiction that defines his current existence. He is fighting for acknowledgement from an institution while also trying to build a life that does not depend on that acknowledgement. He is seeking vindication from the British press while also trying to establish himself in an American media landscape that is genuinely uncertain what to do with a British prince who no longer has a kingdom to point to. And through all of it, the question that never goes away. What is Harry without the royal family? It is not a cruel question. It is the central question of his adult life, and it is one he has not yet fully answered. The memoir was supposed to be part of that answer. The documentary was supposed to be part of it. The Invictus Games, mental health advocacy, and the military charity work. All of it is real, and it matters, but none of it has yet coalesced into a clear, standalone identity that exists independently of the story he left behind, and the palace knows that. Which brings us to the moment Harry found out about the wedding photograph decision. He was in California, that much is known. The details of exactly how the news reached him vary depending on who you ask, but the consistent thread across multiple accounts is this. He did not hear it from his father. He did not receive a courtesy call from a palace aide. The decision had been made, implemented, and released into the public domain before anyone inside that building thought to pick up a phone. Think about what that communicates, not the decision itself, the process. The fact that a choice this significant, one that Harry would obviously see, feel, and have to respond to internally, was made without a single attempt at private communication beforehand. That is not an oversight. Inside a palace that manages every detail of its public output with forensic precision, that silence was a choice. Those close to Harry describe his reaction in consistent terms, not rage, or the kind of public eruption that his critics would expect and his enemies would welcome. Something much quieter, a withdrawal, a stillness. The kind that people who know him well recognize as the response of a man processing something that has confirmed a fear he had been trying not to fully believe. The fear that the reconciliation he had been quietly working toward was not actually within reach. Because here is what the people around Harry will tell you, if you ask them carefully enough. Behind every public statement is Netflix project, podcast appearance, and Invictus photo opportunity. Harry has not stopped hoping. He has not stopped believing on some level that the relationship with his father could be repaired, that the relationship with his brother could find its way back to something recognizable. He visited Charles during the cancer diagnosis, flew across the Atlantic with almost no notice, sat with his father in a private meeting that the palace kept carefully quiet. That visit was not the act of a man who had closed the door. That was a son reaching across an enormous distance because something in him still believed the reach was worth making. And then the photograph decision landed. People in Harry's circle are careful with their words when they discuss this. But the picture they paint is of a man who has been forced to reckon with something uncomfortable. That the efforts he has been making privately have not been reciprocated in the way he hoped. That the palace's public positioning of the royal family has continued to move in a direction that does not include him. And that the gap between the private gestures and the public reality has become too wide to keep explaining away. Charles knows that Harry's hope is still there, and he has chosen, with this decision, not to meet it. Whether that is strategy, heartbreak, or simply the cold logic of institutional survival depends entirely on which version of Charles you believe in. And that is exactly the question we are walking into next. Charles at the center, cold calculation or broken heart, the king. Charles has waited longer for this crown than any heir in British history. 73 years, decades of preparation, watching and standing slightly to the left of the most powerful woman in the room, and understanding that his moment would come eventually. And when it finally came, it came wrapped in grief, in complexity, and in a set of challenges that no amount of preparation could have fully anticipated. The cancer diagnosis changed everything, not just privately, publicly. A king managing a serious illness while simultaneously trying to stabilize a monarchy that has been through more turbulence in the past decade than in the previous 50 years is not a king who has the luxury of ambiguity. Every decision carries extra weight now. Every public signal is scrutinized through the lens of succession, of legacy, of what kind of institution Charles will leave behind when his time as king is done. And against that backdrop, Harry is not just a son. Harry is a variable, an unpredictable, uncontrollable variable in a carefully managed equation. Think about it from a purely institutional standpoint. Harry has written a memoir that named names, aired grievances, and revealed private conversations that senior royals consider deeply sensitive. He has given interviews that landed like grenades inside palace walls. He has pursued legal battles against British press institutions that the monarchy has carefully managed its relationship with for generations. Every move Harry makes in public creates a reaction that the palace communications team has to manage, contain, or respond to. That is expensive, not just financially, strategically. So, the case for cold calculation is straightforward. Charles, advised by a team of experienced courtiers who have spent careers protecting the institution, has made a decision to accelerate the visual and public repositioning of the monarchy around the working royals, around William and Catherine, and the direct line of succession, around a clean, stable narrative that does not have Harry-shaped holes in it. The wedding photograph is part of that repositioning, a deliberate step in a sequence that has been carefully planned and carefully executed. And if that is the full story, then Charles is doing exactly what a king is supposed to do. Protecting the crown, prioritizing the institution over the individual, making hard decisions because hard decisions are the job. But here is where it gets more complicated, because the people who have observed Charles most closely over the past several years do not describe a man who is coldly indifferent to what is happening with Harry. They describe something far more painful than indifference. They describe a man who is grieving, quietly, privately, in the way that people grieve when they cannot fully acknowledge what they have lost, because acknowledging it would require confronting choices that cannot be undone. Charles has spoken publicly about family in ways that are carefully worded but emotionally revealing. His cancer diagnosis prompted a response from Harry that Charles received, by all accounts, with genuine warmth. The private meeting between father and son during that period was described by those aware of it as real, not performative, or a managed photo opportunity. A genuine attempt by two people to find something solid in a relationship that had been badly damaged. And yet, the photograph decision followed, which tells you something important about the space Charles is operating in. The space between what he feels as a father and what he does as a king. That space has always existed inside the monarchy. It existed for Queen Elizabeth. It existed for George VI. It exists for Charles now. And the painful truth is that in every historical instance where that tension has come to a head, the institution has won. The crown does not bend for feelings. It never has. But here is the layer that Charles's closest observers point to that rarely makes it into the public analysis. Charles is not just managing Harry's absence from the institution, he is managing Harry's presence in the public conversation. And those are two very different problems. Harry being gone from royal duties is manageable. The palace has shown it can absorb that and keep moving. What is harder to manage is Harry still being visible, still generating headlines, still sitting in interviews and podcasts and Invictus stages in a way that keeps the Sussex narrative alive and competing with the palace narrative for public attention. The photograph decision, viewed through this lens, is not just about one wedding. It is a signal to Harry, to the media, to the watching public. A signal that the institution is no longer leaving space in its official imagery for a version of events where Harry is both outside the working family and still somehow adjacent to it. The door is not just closing, it is being photographed, which brings us to the advisors. Because Charles does not make these decisions alone. Around him sits a group of senior courtiers whose entire professional purpose is to protect the long-term interests of the monarchy. People who look at the Sussex situation not through the lens of family feeling, but through the lens of institutional risk. And from that vantage point, the calculation is not sentimental. Harry is outside the family, but still generating royal-adjacent headlines is a problem without a clean solution. The photograph decision is the closest thing to a clean solution that the palace has been able to implement without making an explicit public statement. Say nothing. Show everything. Is this punishment or farewell? And the honest answer, the one that nobody inside those walls will ever say out loud, is that it might be both. Which means the next part of this story does not belong to Charles at all. It belongs to the person whose presence started this fracture and whose shadow has never fully left it. And you already know her name. What Meghan has to do with all of this. Nobody inside the palace will say her name in this context. That is the first thing you need to understand. When senior aides discuss the Sussex situation in private, or courtiers map out the communications strategy around Harry's ongoing absence, when advisors brief Charles on how to handle the next inevitable flashpoint, Meghan's name is handled with a particular kind of careful avoidance. Not because she is irrelevant, precisely because she is not. She is in many ways the subject that organizes everything else. And to understand why the photograph decision landed the way it did on Harry, you have to understand the role Meghan plays in the calculations being made on both sides of this story, because she is not a passive figure in any of this. She never has been. What is actually happening with the Sussex brand right now? After the Spotify collapse and the cooling of the Netflix relationship, Meghan has pivoted, hard and fast, and with the kind of deliberate energy that people who have watched her career recognize immediately. The lifestyle brand, the As Ever product line, the return to Instagram with numbers that climbed so fast they made media industry veterans stop and pay attention. The podcast relaunch, the carefully curated public appearances that signal a woman who has decided to build something entirely on her own terms, and it is working. That is the part that complicates the palace narrative considerably. Because the institutional assumption, stated quietly in the corridors of power, if not in press releases, was that once Harry and Meghan were fully separated from the royal apparatus, the public appetite for them would fade. Without the royal connection to trade on, the Sussex brand would gradually lose its oxygen. That assumption is looking increasingly shaky. Meghan's solo momentum has not just sustained the Sussex public profile. In certain spaces, particularly in the American market, it has strengthened it. And every time the Sussex brand generates a fresh wave of attention, it pulls Harry back into a spotlight that the palace would prefer he quietly vacated. So, here is the thing that the palace understands and cannot say publicly. The photograph decision is not purely about Harry. It is a response to the reality that the Sussexes, contrary to institutional expectations, have not faded. And if the palace cannot control the Sussex narrative through inclusion, the only remaining tool is exclusion. Make the separation so visually and symbolically complete that any ongoing Sussex public activity reads as entirely disconnected from the royal family. Draw the line so clearly that nobody can miss it. Now let us talk about Chelsea Davy, because her name has resurfaced in the headlines recently in ways that are worth paying close attention to. Chelsea is Harry's most significant relationship before Meghan. They were together on and off for nearly 7 years. She was present at his side through some of the most formative years of his adult life, and the relationship ended by most accounts, not because the feeling was gone, but because Chelsea made a clear-eyed decision that the royal life Harry came with was not a life she was willing to step into. She has said so herself, publicly, without apparent bitterness. She watched what the scrutiny did to people inside that world, and she chose differently. And now Chelsea has a growing family, a life built entirely outside the royal orbit, a happiness that is quiet and private and completely her own. The timing of her resurfacing in the media conversation around Harry is not accidental. It never is with the British press. The implicit comparison being drawn is one that cuts directly to the heart of Harry's current reality. The woman who walked away from him because of the royal world he represented has found peace. The world he fought so hard to escape has not delivered the same peace to him. That contrast is pointed, and Harry knows it. But here is what that contrast actually reveals about the Meghan dimension of this story. Harry's choices since leaving the royal family have consistently prioritized the Sussex partnership over every other relationship in his life. His relationship with his father, his relationship with his brother, his friendships with people who knew him before Meghan, his connection to a British identity that he grew up inside and that formed him in ways he is probably still discovering. Every bridge that has been strained or broken in the past 5 years has one consistent factor running through it: now. That does not mean the bridges broke because of Meghan specifically. Relationships inside the royal family were complicated long before she arrived. The institution itself carries wounds that predate the Sussex marriage by decades. Harry's own anger at the press, palace, and at the treatment of his mother's memory, none of that originated with Meghan. But she has become the lens through which every subsequent decision gets made. And the palace knows that as long as that remains true, genuine reconciliation is structurally very difficult. Because reconciling with Harry in any meaningful public sense means finding a way to bring Meghan back into a visual and institutional narrative that has spent years carefully constructing itself around her absence. And that is a problem with no clean solution. The photograph decision was not made in isolation. It was a response to the Sussex brand's resilience and Meghan's momentum, a response to the palace's growing recognition that the half-open door was creating more problems than it was solving. Close it. Completely. Visually, symbolically, finally. And in doing so, leave Harry standing on the outside of a photograph that tells him everything he needs to know about where this family has decided he belongs. Which means there is only one question left. Is there any road back? Or has the point of no return already been passed? That is exactly where we are going, and the answer is not the one most people are hoping for. The point of no return. Let us be honest about something. The phrase point of no return gets thrown around a lot when people talk about Harry and the royal family. It has been used so many times, across so many flashpoints, that it has almost lost its meaning. The Oprah interview was supposed to be the point of no return, The memoir was supposed to be the point of no return. The Netflix documentary and the phone hacking trials. Every new development in this story arrives wrapped in the same language of finality. And yet, the door kept appearing to stay open. Barely, imperfectly, but open. So the real question this part has to answer is this. Is this time actually different? And the honest answer, based on everything that has been laid out across this script, is yes. Here is why. Every previous flashpoint in the Harry and royal family story carried within it some residual ambiguity, some space for interpretation, some possibility, however slim, that what looked like a closing door was actually just a difficult moment in a long and complicated relationship. The palace never fully confirmed the rupture. Harry never fully stopped reaching. The ambiguity kept the story alive and kept a version of hope alive inside it. The photograph decision is different in a specific and important way. It is not a statement that can be walked back. It is not a quote that can be recontextualized. It is a visual record, permanent, archived, circulated. The kind of document that historians and biographers will point to years from now as the moment the repositioning became undeniable. You cannot unrelease a photograph or quietly revise what the official record shows. Charles, or the people acting in his name, made a choice that has no reverse gear, and Harry knows it. Now let us talk about William, because his silence in all of this is its own kind of statement. William has not commented publicly on the photograph decision. He has not issued any signal, however subtle, of discomfort with the direction the palace has taken. And William's silence is not neutral. A future king who disagrees with an institutional decision of this magnitude has ways of making that disagreement known without ever holding a press conference. The fact that nothing has come from that direction tells you that William is either in agreement with what has been done or has made peace with it. Either way, Harry has lost the ally he most needed in this moment. Then there are the children. Archie and Lilibet are growing up in California with a version of their family story that is being shaped in real time by decisions like this one. They will not understand the photograph issue now, but they will understand it eventually. They will look at the official record of this period in royal history and see where their father appears and where he does not. They will inherit this fracture and carry it into adulthood in ways that nobody can fully predict or control. That is perhaps the most painful dimension of all of this. The damage is no longer contained to one generation. So, what are the realistic paths forward? The path of reconciliation requires things that currently appear to be unavailable. It requires Harry to make a public gesture of enough substance that the palace can point to it as a genuine shift. It requires Charles to be willing to absorb the institutional risk of reopening a door that his advisors have spent considerable effort closing. It requires William to actively support rather than simply tolerate a rapprochement. And it requires the Sussex brand to somehow disentangle itself from the adversarial posture toward the institution that currently defines its public identity. None of those things are impossible, but none of them are close. The path of permanent separation is simpler. It is already mostly built. The photograph decision is close to the final brick. Harry builds his American life. The palace consolidates its new narrative. The British public gradually adjusts to a royal family shaped around William's succession, and Harry becomes a historical footnote to a reign that moved on without him. That path requires nothing new from anyone. It simply requires everyone to keep doing what they are already doing, which is why it is the more likely one. Has Charles been planning this longer than anyone realized? Yes, not with malice, or necessarily with the cold indifference that Harry's supporters would attribute to it, but with the quiet, incremental, institutionally rational logic of a man who has finally accepted that the cost of keeping the door open is higher than the cost of closing it. A king who is also a father, making a king's decision, and living somewhere private and unreachable with what that costs him as a father. The photograph has been taken, the selection has been made, and somewhere in Montecito, a prince who was born into one of the most powerful families on earth is looking at an image that confirms what part of him has known for a while now. He is no longer in the frame. A photograph should be a moment frozen in time, a memory and a record of where people stood and who they stood with. But inside the British monarchy, photographs have always been something more than that. They are decisions. And the decision that has left Harry reeling is not just about one wedding or one image or one difficult moment in an already fractured relationship. It is about a family that has been quietly, deliberately, and permanently redrawing its boundaries. And a king who has finally stopped leaving space for a son who chose a different life. Harry still has his family in Montecito, he still has his causes and voice. But the frame has closed, and some doors, once photographed shut, never reopen. If this story made you think, drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you are new here, subscribe. There is always more to this family than the headlines reveal.